Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
The Wyoming Legislature is completing its third week here during the 2018 budget session. I'm Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS. Welcome to Capital Outlook. This week we get into detail with differing proposals from both the House and the Senate relative to how education will be funded in Wyoming. We have an interesting profile with Senator Brian Boner. He's from Douglas. We talked to him about his service in the United States Air Force. He was a missileer, and also that he's the youngest serving member in the Wyoming Senate. We have a visit with two members of the minority party, and we conclude with our weekly conversation with the leadership of the Wyoming Legislature, President Eli Bebout and Speaker of the House Steve Harshman. That's next on Capital Outlook, which begins now.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.
And as we begin our third week of Capital Outlook here from the Legislature's temporary home at the Jonah Business Center here in Cheyenne, I'm pleased to be visiting with Representative Sommers hails from Pinedale, and Senator Hicks. Senator Hicks hails from Baggs. Welcome to you both. We've got a lot to unpack today, and both of you are knee-deep in how we'll fund schools in Wyoming marching forward. And I want to start there first, if we could. Senator Hicks, you're a co-sponsor of Senate File 117, which takes a larger, I think, knife to school funding than perhaps the House is considering as we speak. Walk us through your thoughts on how Wyoming should fund its schools going forward and what Senate File 117 does as far as cuts potentially that might be coming to Wyoming schools.
Yeah, it's always a difficult issue when we try to grapple with schools. So what Senate File 117 attempts to do is go into those areas there where we think there's maybe surplus in the model, or areas in the model that aren't currently actively reflected in what the spending of schools are in certain circumstances, and also work within the confines of the Supreme Court decisions to make sure that we don't go outside the bounds of those. And so it's difficult to go in there and find all those, and there's little pieces and parts on numerous different areas. I'll give you an example. One of the things that we know is right now we're funding 600 vacant teacher positions in the state of Wyoming. Those are funded in the model. We call them ghost teachers. There's 600 ghost teachers that we're funding. So we're taking a look at that. And the interesting thing about that, not only are we funding the positions, we're paying for the insurance and the retirement, and all that's calculated into the model that we fund schools with. So the money's going out and it's being spent. So we're trying to understand where those differences are and if there's a cost savings opportunity to go in there and work in those areas. So it's trying to stay within the guidelines, but find those, what we would call the opportunity places to look at to reforming education.
Sure, Representative Sommers, you have been involved with this for not only serving on the Select Recalibration Committee, but also on the Joint Appropriations Committee. You've been knee-deep in education funding now for the last interim. The House takes a different view as far as potential cuts to education, at least as we speak today. Give us an update on where the House is relative to education.
Sure. So right now we're reviewing House Bill 140, and really the biggest cut in House Bill 140 is an ADM shift. So currently we kind of fund ADM on a school-wide basis, and this would take it to a district basis and kind of cut out some duplicative funding of students. So the way the current is, sometimes a student can be counted twice. So it's a much softer, I guess, a much softer cut to education over a period of time. And then it looks at a series of things to try to find a solution to education funding. So it's not just about cuts. It's about trying to shift shift revenue sources and kind of to look to the future. So that's really the difference between the two. It's a much smaller cut, and it looks at a larger perspective on education.
There's been discussion about student-teacher ratios. Senator Hicks, your bill talks about that. One thing that struck me is the Recalibration Committee, in its report, talked about higher student-teacher ratios, but also said that would come with a cost. Yet you're finding cuts able to support that. What's the difference there?
Basically, they're very similar from the standpoint that when we talk about the ghost teachers that are in the school districts, those 600 that we're funding, it is a result of those classroom sizes. And what we found out, almost every school district in the state of Wyoming has asked for a waiver on that. So we currently have, almost all the districts have classrooms, not all classrooms, but do have classrooms that are above that's in the model. So the fact is we know that the schools are already functioning relatively well already because they have larger classrooms. There is a tremendous savings in there. Craig, I think it's very important that, especially the people of Wyoming understand, and it's the Wyoming legislature that built the education system we have today, and there's nobody in this building that wants to tear that down. The simple fact is we as a society have to live within our means. So when we talk about cuts, sometimes there's a lot of hyperbole associated with that. If we look at the overall effect of what we've done in the last 3 years, we've cut roughly 3.8 to 4% of the education budget in the state of Wyoming. So when we talk about $40 million, it sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But when you put that in context of a $1.6 billion budget, it's a relatively small amount. So what the philosophy in the Senate is we've got to come to grips with this. Representative Sommers talked about, the House version is diversions. And the House would like to divert almost every stream of income to some level, either in the school operations or capital constructions. And it always begs the question in my mind, if we're taking money away from something, what's not getting funded? The philosophy of the Senate has been is we need to put schools on a glide path. And quite frankly, they've been reduced spending less than any other entity that we have in the state of Wyoming today. Most of the state agencies have come down anywhere from 10 to 18%. Cities, towns, and counties, we've had reduced funding from the high periods and stuff. So we have to put it in context. What we're looking at, again, even with a $40 million cut, is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of an average of another 3 or 4%. So by the time, if we even adopted the Senate's model that we got through this biennium, over a 5 or 6 year period of time, we're looking at probably a maximum of somewhere around 8 to 9% reduction in the spending. So the percentages mean something when we look at the overall context of the cost of funding K through 12 education.
Representative Sommers?
Yeah, so I beg to disagree. And, actually education has dropped 4 to 5% in funding. And we found in the Department of Health that we had to bring, and the Department of Family Services, we're bringing $90 million back this year because we cut too far. And we cut too far in areas that touch people. And education touches people. So the cuts in the Department of Health are going to end up being like 5% in the end. And so I think that's very similar to where we're going to be in education. And to talk a little bit about the funding model and the block grant. So he mentioned the student-teacher ratio and kind of how that works. What we provide, what both of our consultants have said in the past, so we've hired 2 different consultants now to look at education funding. Both of them have come up with similar results in that we have to fund a cost-based model. And both of them have said that needs to be a block grant. So when you talk about, well, we're actually using a higher class size, we are, but the reason we are is we have to fund teachers higher to get them to live in areas. These small rural communities in Wyoming, you have to pay salaries higher. And the way you do that is by shifting the class size a little bit so you can pay for them. So the idea of a ghost employees really doesn't mean much because we provide a block grant to schools to fund education.
Every kid in the state of Wyoming deserves the same and equal quality education. That's a Supreme Court ruling and it is a constitutional provision. What's debatable is as to what that level of funding is for those children. So one of the things that we look at is a comparable analysis with our neighbors around the state. And even if we have a higher cost ratio, we are substantially higher than any of the surrounding states. So we spend about $17,000 per student. The next closest state with all of our surrounding neighbors is about $12,500. So the question is what does it take to provide a quality education? So when we talk about reductions in funding, we're trying to strike that balance. We want to continue to provide that, but to say that we can't cut, to bring it down to something that's, you know, the debate's not whether we need to or have to. It's just the tools that we're going to use and at what level. I've had this discussion with Representative Sommers, and again, none of us are going to take and try to damage our educational system. We're trying to find the sweet spot for what we can get to and provide that quality education, but it's also a reasonable expectation from the taxpayers as to what we can actually afford. And so the debate is going to be over the tools that it takes to get there.
So let's talk about kind of the whole Supreme Court decisions and what came out of that. So really what came out of that is the Supreme Court's decision said, you know, you really need to have a third party take a look at what is an adequate, equitable education in the state of Wyoming, according to our constitutional mandate. And so over the time we've hired consultants, and originally we had a MAP model, and then we went to Picus and Odin, and then lately we went to APA. And so we re-asked the question, what is an adequate, equitable education? And so right now our legislative model is funding schools in Wyoming at less than both of those models. So we're funding less than both consultants say we should be funding education in Wyoming. And I think that's important. It's you know, really people should read the Campbell decisions, because it really enlightens you on what our Constitution says. So I think we've cut far enough. And I just want to say, I think education is the single most important service that government provides its people. It is the great equalizer. And I see what cuts have done in my little districts. Some of it's due to reduction in ADM during kind of the bust, but some of it's the cuts we've made. And it's going to get to the point they can't provide programs.
Senator, before we move on, what are superintendents telling you? You've come from a small district, which many say have been impacted more than maybe some of the larger districts.
You know, it's an interesting dichotomy when I actually have 5 school districts in my Senate district. So it's across the board. But I will tell you that it's been some of our more rural school districts as probably the ones that tell me that they've been able to survive the best. And some of my larger urban districts would tell you that they've absolutely been gutted, you know, that they've been eviscerated and can't function anymore. So it's across the board. And I think a lot of that reflects back to those communities. And so when you have a rural community that's used to operating on what I would say is a rancher's budgets that has a 50% swing in income from any one year to the next, understand really hard times. So, but it is really across the board. I mean, obviously, all superintendents' job is to try to fully fund and provide as much opportunity as they can. But some districts have said we're okay, you know, where we're at right now. The cuts haven't hurt us. We've absorbed them and been able to improvise and continue to deliver education. And other ones said, you know, you've cut us to the bone. So I don't think there's any uniformity out there amongst the school districts.
The debate now will likely go to conference committee, and that will happen in the next week or so here in the legislature. And by this time next week, we'll probably have a more clear understanding.
Myself and Representative Sommers have the same intent, but we'll probably argue endlessly about the tools to get there. That's the beauty of the Wyoming legislature, is we can sit down at any time and have a conversation. And even on areas where we disagree, we're going to walk out of here friends. And at the end of the day, we're going to come up with a good solution for the state of Wyoming.
Well, the end of the day is in about 8 or 9 days here, Representative Sommers.
Just back on the CapCon piece just a bit. You know, one thing the Supreme Court decisions talked about is that you have to rank schools and rate them and figure out which ones need build. And so we've come up with a system. I will agree with the senator in that I think we have put too many bells and whistles on schools that built schools. But the fact of the matter remains is we have created a model that needs refined on the dollars that go into the construction process. I agree we need to take a look at that. There's places we can find efficiencies in the CapCon piece without going in and changing our Constitution.
Well, it'll be an interesting next few days relative to education. No doubt it's the most serious issue that you'll have to deal with here in the next week. Senator Hicks, thank you so much for joining us today. Representative Sommers, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you, Larry.
Up next on Capitol Outlook, we have a Senate profile with Senator Brian Boner. He's from Douglas. Stay with us. It's our pleasure to be joined now on Capitol Outlook with Senator Brian Boner from Douglas. Senator, welcome.
Well, thanks, Craig. Thanks for coming to Douglas.
You know, we're filming this during Christmas time here in Wyoming, so it's a couple months before you're really going to get after it here in Cheyenne. But you've had an interesting interim. There are a lot of topics, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. But you're a sixth-generation Wyomingite.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we've been in Commerce County farming and ranching for 6 generations. I'm the sixth one now.
Why did you want to become involved in politics? You get to wear, as you told me, the youngest person's hat, or the...
That's right. There's actually a hat for the youngest member of the Wyoming Senate, and I still have it after 2.5 years. But, you know, it's something I've always been interested in. Growing up, whether it be being involved in middle school, student council, all the way to my time in the Air Force operating a strategic weapons system, which I would argue produces a direct political effect as opposed to strictly a military effect. It's something I've been involved with whether I wanted to or not, basically my whole life. More specifically when it comes to the Wyoming legislature, my predecessor, Jim Anderson, actually got me involved when I was still in high school. He was relatively new to the Wyoming Senate and had a program through the local economic development organization where we would go and research bills and write on the little report, and he would use them in making his decisions. And so that was his, you know, he's a retired teacher. He always kind of had that teacher's heart. And so he really was the one that got me specifically interested in the Wyoming legislature. And that, I guess, came to fruition about 15 years later when I got appointed.
I think it may be safe to say that you have a bachelor's in political science.
Yes.
And I would bet you're also the only member of the Wyoming legislature that also has a degree in Russian.
To my knowledge, yes. So that was it was a fascinating experience. I think you really do learn the way a particular society or country thinks about the world through their language. For example, in Russian, there's no, they don't really say, I have this, I have that, I don't, you know, so it's not, I have a car. It's, for me, there is a car, u меня есть. So it literally means like there is one assigned for me, or there's one available for me. There's not that idea of private property necessarily that's taken root here in the United States and in Western Europe. So it's interesting to see how those differences of opinion kind of come to fruition through language. And so yeah, that was an incredible experience. I had a chance to spend about 2 months over there for a study abroad before my senior year, and yeah, it was good to see that part of the world.
So when things in the legislature don't go your way, are you whispering these comments in Russian that we can't understand? Is that how that works?
No, that's not. In fact, it's been about 10 years, so it's a little rusty. So I wouldn't. If anybody challenged me to use my Russian right now, it'd be pretty ugly. But yeah, it was just a good experience to learn something that was completely foreign.
You went on to get a master's degree in agribusiness.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
But you also joined the service. When did you join, and why did you want to serve?
So I joined after doing ROTC at the University of Wyoming. I joined the Air Force in 2007. I was a junior in high school when 9/11 happened, so that deeply affected me. I wanted to be an Air Force pilot, so that's why I did Air Force ROTC at the university, and I ended up being disqualified from flight school about 2 months before I graduated, so I was off to missile school for me, and I ended up being in a launch control center in my home state instead of flying planes and seeing the world. I was stationed at Warren Air Force Base, so So it was a really incredible experience, met a lot of incredible people, and got to do some very interesting work for the first 6 years out of college.
So doing what you have done with literally your hand on the key that could launch a nuclear missile. Mm-hmm. And with the events of today, with what's happening in North Korea, you have to have thought about these issues in current day forms, and what has gone through your mind when so much has been in the news about the potential for nuclear war again, really for the first time in a few generations.
Mm-hmm. It's a reminder. I'm glad that people are having that discussion, because it's always been a reality. It's always undergirded our entire national security. So whether it's in the public interest or not, or whether it's been noticed by the public or not, it's still been a fundamental element of our national security. So nothing has really changed in North Korea fundamentally. They're still not suicidal. The fact is that they act up every once in a while, but for the past 25, 30 years, we've rewarded them for acting up. They calm down, we give them a concession. So I think we have to reassess that policy now that they're approaching an operational capability for a nuclear missile capable of reaching the continental United States. So that's a very serious situation, but it's ultimately undergirded by the fact that we can retaliate against them, and they're not a suicidal regime. They're not going to start a situation that could end in the complete destruction of their own country.
Do you envision a day when the world doesn't have nuclear weapons anymore?
No, we know what the world's like without nuclear weapons, starting with World War II, or ending with World War II, I should say, where we've lost tens of millions of people. We don't know how many people died in that war, to the tune of about 10 million people. And so you see the massive decrease in worldwide casualties due to war since we dropped those bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the fact is that dropping those bombs ended the war and saved millions of lives, most of them Japanese, in the process. So no, we know what the world's like without nuclear weapons, and it's actually a pretty terrible place.
Back to your service in the legislature. You've had some hurdles. I mean, there's been a learning curve for you. Is it a challenge for you to work with a legislature that's primarily a lot older than you, not just a year or two?
Sure, it's always a challenge learning a new job, especially when we have to make the decisions that we must in the legislature. I haven't found it to be terribly different from learning how to get back into agriculture after getting out of the service, or learning how to be a nuclear missile operator to begin with. The social dynamics are a little different, but overall, learning a new job I've found to be remarkably similar.
Do you, maybe a decade from now, or maybe 2 decades from now, do you envision that Wyoming will still have a state budget that's 70% reliant on the mineral industry? Or in your eyes, might it be different?
I imagine that it would be slightly different, maybe not in a huge way. I think that the fact is that we're still going to have coal miners, we're still going to have oil and gas, we're still going to have uranium. The basic physical realities of our energy grid require that we have these traditional sources of energy, because they're affordable and they're reliable. And that's something we just don't have with, say, alternative energy, which we're going to see more of in the state as we build out transmission capacity and maintain that business-friendly tax atmosphere for those sources of energy. So looking forward, I see more alternative forms of energy. I hope we see some more entrepreneurship that's based off of folks who can maybe live in Wyoming and enjoy our incredible quality of life and low tax structure, and produce value for people remotely. They can work remotely, and whether that be coding a computer program, or having a social media management business for businesses who want their social media to be managed by a professional. There's also opportunity for that, both through alternative energy and a more internet-based economy. And I think that's the way that Wyoming has to go, is leveraging our incredible quality of life to be a important part of the 21st century.
You've heard at least 2, and there have been many State of the State addresses that have said, hey, we've got the best tax structure in the country. Yet in many people's eyes, it hasn't created the diversity that many would like to now see. With a great tax structure, lack of diversity, are you sure that can change?
It absolutely can. But, as a small government conservative, I realize that we're just one piece of the puzzle here in Wyoming. So there's there's not a major metropolitan area in Wyoming. There's some significant weather that we have to deal with, and it's not, and there's lots of other places to our northeast, especially, that deal with similar issues. So yeah, we're one part of the puzzle, and we'll continue to do our part through initiatives like Endow. But at the end of the day, that's up to the private sector to make that decision to come here and to do business. And as a sixth generation Wyoming, I think that's a good decision. But ultimately, that's not entirely, that ball is not entirely in our court. But we'll continue to do our part.
There's a couple staples that are here in Douglas. There's the State Law Enforcement Academy and the State Fair. And I want to ask you a little bit about the State Fair, being someone who's native to Wyoming as well. In my eyes, maybe it hasn't ever had the traction that some people would like it to see, and it's always struggled in one way or another for funding. You live right here in Douglas. What's your perception of how important the State Fair is to Wyoming in line of a decreasing number of young folks who are in ag?
And we've maintained that focus on our 4-H and FFA programs with the State Fair. We haven't focused on bringing in as many people as possible because we want to maintain that quality experience for our 4-H and FFA kids. And those are exceptional programs. They teach our young people how to handle responsibility, how to see something through to the end, and how to balance a checkbook. It's something I've benefited from greatly, and many folks throughout Wyoming have. So we're going to continue that focus on the kids and not put those profits over the future generation of Wyomingites. Now, that being said, we have some tremendous investments recently in those fairgrounds. They are significant facilities that can be much more utilized throughout the rest of the year. So I look forward to having that discussion and changing potentially the management structure of the fair to be more entrepreneurial, to bring in more events throughout the year from out of state and from the region, because those are some of the best facilities in the entire state, and we need to utilize them more. So as far as the State Fair overall goes, in terms of the revenue that it brings into the state, that needs to be more robust. And when we do that, I can allow ourselves to continue to focus on the 4-H and FFA program during that week-long State Fair.
Do you see yourself continuing to want to contribute to the Wyoming legislature with your service?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'm 2.5 years into this experience. I don't see myself staying for an extended amount of time, but I certainly see myself doing this for the next several years. We'll see how things turn out and how things work with my other job on the farm and ranch. We're still in the process of I'm in the process of learning how to take over the day-to-day management of that operation, and that all plays out. And there has to be a balance there. So.
Well, Senator Boner, thank you so much for spending time with us, the youngest senator in the Wyoming legislature.
Well, thanks, Craig. Thanks for thinking of me.
Pleasure to visit with you.
Thanks.
Good. And now we're in our third segment here on the third week of Capital Outlook from the temporary Capitol here at the Jonah Business Center in Cheyenne. We're here with the minority party to get their feedback. Senator John Hastert and Representative Stan Blake both hail from Green River.
That's correct.
Representative, play ball.
I say that after the Pledge of Allegiance in the House, yes.
Every morning,
yeah.
And we get a chance to hear that.
As I do,
yeah.
too. And if you've ever watched, Senator Rothfuss throws one of his chocolate round candies that I catch every morning.
You guys sat in close proximity to one another.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting. So we're here to play ball. So
to
speak. Welcome both of you to Capital Outlet.
Thanks,
Senator,
Craig.
I want to start with you. In 2005, you brought an interesting program that has had an interesting impact and now really needs to be expanded. And I'm talking about the drug donation program that you're bringing forward again this year. Tell us about that.
The original legislation was titled the Medication Donation Program, and we started it in 2005 and passed the legislature, and it created a donation program where people could donate their unused medications to a central repository and then get it distributed out to people in need. And since that time, it has just taken off like crazy, and it's just become such a huge success. The Director Forsland is mentioned in committee as the unknown jewel within the Department of Health. And to date, I think they've distributed over $7 million worth of medication to people in need. They have a central repository here in Cheyenne, and then are able to distribute the medications out to locations across the entire state. And they've been successful in coordinating with the Postal Service. The Postal Service has a program where they provide free shipping for these medications. So that's been, just a tremendous help for that. So people, and they've received in Wyoming, they've received donations as far away as Florida for this program here in Wyoming. And just, I think it was 2 years ago, Wyoming's program received the Bright Ideas in Government Award from the Kennedy Center at Johns Hopkins. So it's huge success. And then also 2 years ago, it was kind of neat, I was contacted by a senator in Texas, and Texas modeled their legislation after Wyoming's, and now Texas is running this, and from what I understand is very successsul.
It's been run on a shoestring budget. Now maybe a little expansion is needed to continue.
Yeah, and that's been the problem. We haven't really touched it in the 12 years that it's been running, and it absolutely is shoestring. It's like $200,000 a year, and we have a part-time pharmacist and part-time assistants, and right now they have absolutely outgrown the facility they're in. They have like a 900 square foot building, and they need to move over to the Hathaway building. If they move there, they'll have twice the size. And right now they're storing medications that they have donated in closets and restrooms and just every nook and cranny. And I was told that right now they're about 2 months behind in sorting out the medications donated. And the bill I'm running, Senate File 105, is to help also enhance the program by providing assistance for those that can receive donations directly from the manufacturer. The donation program is limited to non-perishable type of medications, and the enhancement on the bill part, and then also in getting additional people. The first part will be being able to get the manufacturers something like insulin, for example. Insulin is expensive, and insulin is perishable. It needs to be refrigerated. So by the program assisting people in need, again, and filling out the applications and getting them in connection with the manufacturer, they can receive the donations right from the manufacturer.
More information directly from the Department of Health. They'd be happy to help Wyoming residents participate.
Yep.
Representative Blake, you're running a bill relative to wildlife conservation license plates.
Yes.
We're showing now that mock license plate to our viewer. Tell us about the intent.
Well, Craig, the intent was, first of all, it was brought to me by an organization that's right in Senator Hastert's district and my district in Green River. It's the Muley Fanatics, and they're fanatical about mule deer in the state, and they had a summit in Pinedale with Wyoming Game and Fish, Wyoming Department of Transportation. What can we do to prevent wildlife vehicle crashes? And there's everyone who drives in Wyoming has probably hit a deer or an elk or a moose, you name it, antelope. And one of the solutions that they came up with at that summit was maybe we could get a license plate. And it's similar to the University of Wyoming plate. You pay extra money to get the plate, and the money would go to a fund in WYDOT, which could only be used for wildlife crossings, the overpasses around Daniel, Trappers Point, underpasses like the one in Nugget Canyon, which is west of Kemmer, and increased fencing, the higher fencing that keeps wildlife from getting on the highway, and signage. So it could only be used for those purposes, and people, these organizations, they want to preserve, first and foremost, human life, and they're concerned about wildlife because when man came and put in barriers like highways, the migration corridors didn't change for deer, elk, antelope. They still need to go south from Pinedale down towards the Red Desert in the winter, and then they need to go back up north in the summer. So, I think it's a good idea. It lets these sportsmen who want to be involved and want to be part of the solution, they put some, I hate to say it, but skin in the game, as we hear in the legislature a lot, but it lets them put their money to help be part of the solution.
I want to ask you both about the economy in Sweetwater County and in southwest Wyoming. A lot of talk within Dow in this legislature. You're both well familiar with the governor's initiative. Oftentimes, I think people centralize those thoughts maybe on the Cheyennes or the Caspers or maybe even the national parks area, the Codys and Sheridans and stuff. What about Sweetwater County? How are things in Sweetwater County now, and what are your thoughts for its future?
One of the things that's unique about Sweetwater County and you know, Sweetwater County hasn't felt the downturn as bad. I mean, definitely issues there, but not quite as bad because we have the Natrona mines there. And the Natrona mines have been able to sustain the downturn and fend it off a little bit better than maybe some other industries. We have, you know, in the Natrona industry, we of course have a huge domestic sales, but what really has made the difference is the fact that, you know, we ship a lot of this of our soda ash overseas, and so we're not tied to the GNP as bad. So the downturn didn't affect us quite as bad.
Things looking good?
Well, you know, I think we really have a unique opportunity in Sweetwater County. We have soda ash, which is used to make almost everything: glass, fertilizer, detergent, you name it. John probably knows more than I, but it's in everything. We also have abundant water there. We have consistent power, Jim Bridger Power Plant. So there's a great opportunity to bring in some manufacturing. We need to make our products right here in Wyoming, and Sweetwater County and southwest Wyoming is a great place, I think, to look at expanding and bringing some manufacturers in there to make our products with Wyoming materials, resources, and make it right there in Sweetwater County, southwest Wyoming.
Senator Hastert and Representative Blake, neither of you supported Wyoming's budget out of this body 2 years ago. Senator Hastert, you serve on the Joint Appropriations Committee. There's already now, you both had an opportunity to see your work now and are working through budget amendments, et cetera. Is the budget at a point today that you plan to support, or do you know yet?
Don't know yet, and it's, you know, doing this for 15 years, I've come to realize that, you know, while the process is ongoing, everything is fluid, and the budget is more so, you know, and really the conference committee is going to determine the budget and the final outcome, and that's where you can make the determination. If you absolutely can't determine what is going to be in the final product today, and we won't know that until the committee finishes their work.
What are your thoughts?
I haven't voted for the budget the past 2 years. You're right. I did vote for the House version to come out, but I'm concerned of the Senate version. The cuts to education to me were too much. And I'm a huge supporter of education. I think, you know, schools need to tighten their belts along with everybody else in Wyoming. But we cut 70-some million last year from education. The Senate version, which I really haven't seen yet, that cuts way more than the House did. So like Senator Hastert said, we will see once the appropriations get together, and we'll see what the differences are.
I would agree with Representative Blake that education funding is a huge concern for me also. And I think some of the action that is even in my own chamber that does concern me. I'm a huge supporter. We need to, you know, I've had a lot of people tell me that don't do any revenue enhancements until you do more cuts to education. And then I've asked them, I said, okay, what's that level? How many kids do I put in a classroom? How many teachers do we cut? How many buildings do we shut down before you say it's okay that we can do revenue enhancers? And so far I haven't got an answer to that.
You both signed on to a letter written to Representative Liz Cheney requesting that she does not release any wilderness study areas or recommended management for them without hearing back from residents. Give us the context of that letter.
Well, I was very concerned. We have some very pristine areas across the state, but speaking of Sweetwater County, for example, Adobe Town, and for the public not to have input on how some of these wilderness study areas are going to be managed is just unconscionable, that people can't weigh in. And so public, for us and for me, public comment is crucial for people to be able to weigh in on.
Have they had
their
this
issues.
opportunity before? I mean, we're talking about issues dating back to 1991 or so.
Yes, they have, and that's why it's important to continue that dialogue.
Yeah, and I signed on to the letter because the decision needs to be made locally in Sweetwater County. We have the Red Desert. If you haven't been there, it has some beautiful areas. The wilderness study areas, I think, are like 3% of Sweetwater County, and Adobe Town, Oregon Buttes, beautiful areas. The decision to be made in Washington, D.C. without any input from the residents of Wyoming and Sweetwater County that's not right in my mind. So we've just urged Representative Cheney to let Sweetwater County take comments, and the Sweetwater County commissioners agreed, and so that's why I signed on.
Well, and I was just going to say that for the Sweetwater County Commission also to ensure that they didn't do any action without, or any recommendations without public input. And I think that was just critical. I think we all support energy development, multiple use of our state lands, but there are areas that don't need to be touched, and that need to be preserved.
It should be protected. Yes.
Letter was written recently. Any response yet?
I just received a response from Congresswoman Cheney's office saying that she'll ensure that the Congresswoman does see the letter. I understand the commission saw the letter and they thanked us for our input on that.
And I've just received some social media input thanking for joining the letter, because people want that chance to put in their 2 cents worth about wilderness study areas.
It's a hard question. There'll be a lot of debate, as we've learned earlier in our program tonight, here in the next week, relative to that exact topic. So Representative Stan Blake, Senator John Hastert, thank you so much for joining us on Capitol Outlook. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate it.
We're ready now to move on to our weekly visit with the leadership of the Wyoming legislature in our final segment of Capitol Outlook. That's next. For our final Capitol Outlook segment of the week, we're again pleased to be joined by the leadership of the Wyoming legislature, the President of the Senate, Senator Eli Bebout, and the Speaker of the House, Representative Steve Harshman. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good morning.
Thanks.
Mr. President, let me start with you. You're fairly positive here as we're heading into the final week of the legislature.
Absolutely, and good morning, everybody. Again, I was driving in early this morning and thinking about how lucky and blessed we are to live in a great state like Wyoming. We have some differences, we have some great debate, but we have public servants that serve in the legislature. We have active citizens out there, our constituents, that let us know how they feel, and they have access to us, and they, emails, phone calls, meetings, and with the governor, with all of the elected officials. We're just really lucky, and you look at the rest of our country and the divisiveness that's going on and what's happening. So we have a code of the West in Wyoming, and it works. And I just feel really fortunate to be in the Senate, but more importantly to be part of Wyoming, be a citizen of this great state.
Mr. Speaker, I mean, there's some tough issues ahead, but are you happy with the way things are progressing?
I think, the House of Representatives was on the floor till about 7:45 again last night, and working important issues. And I tell you, it's just whether you agree or disagree, or you're on the winning side or the losing side on a certain issue, I think. Each day, I think that, the last several weeks now, I've just become more convinced and more really pleased with the process. I mean, the process works. You got 60, independent thinkers who have their own ideas, who are duly elected, and every vote counts the same. And I think this whole debate process, and in the end, I think it all works. I think our founders it's really a genius setup, and I think Wyoming, this is the shortest session in the country, 20 days. So there's a lot of pressure, a lot of time pressure particularly. And, but really that's the way it should be, I think. And then everybody's going to go back home and to their real lives.
But the rubber now is meeting the road. Both of you
Sure.
appointed your budget conference committee. that have some fairly serious differences in House bills and Senate bills to get through and to bring back to your bodies. You're both in leadership positions. What have you told your conference committees? What's the charge from the Senate side and then the House side?
Well, the beauty of it is, and you know, there's 60 in the House with different ideas and different thoughts about it. We have 30 in the Senate, same way, and we've gone through a couple of weeks, through the 2 months off and on that the Appropriation Committee worked on the budget bill. So there are some differences, and we have that, and that's why we have a two-party system or two-house system in the legislature. So there are some issues out there when you really look at the budget bill, and there's some differences, but at the end of the day, I think they're all very solvable. The Senate has some strong ideas about different things, about capital construction, about for schools and the state, and where we do with our money and how we spend it. So, but I point to my committee. I'm going to go with the same group of 5 senators that have worked on this since last year. And
all members of the Joint Appropriations Committee.
Yes, they understand it, they know it, and we've had a great discussion about how the Senate feels, and the strong majority of the senators feel a certain way, and that's what we'll try to do, and we'll go in there with an open mind. It is a conference committee. There is compromise. We understand that. But we have some strong feelings in the Senate, just like the House does on their side.
It's a 5-5 committee now, Mr.
Right,
Speaker.
and our committee's all appropriators as well, and folks who've spent the most time on the budget. And so really the budget, general fund-wise, is within $1 million of each other. Many identical amendments passed. I think the most significant ones were to appropriate more money to the Department of Health and Department of Family Services, DD waivers, and also suicide prevention. And so you've seen significant increases. I think Department of Health, and that came from the floor in addition to the budget increases that the Joint Appropriations Committee had approved. So, a year ago at this time, the Department of Health was at about a 10% reduction. Biggest agency in state government, 40% of the general fund. We've added back half that now. We went too far, frankly, and we've got all these services out on the ground. We've recognized that. We're going to make sure all those commitments are taken care of. So I think that's the one thing we'll easily agree on. Those are mere amendments. But I think you mentioned the issues are going to be really state capital construction, school capital construction, and then I think how we're going to have a plan to fund our schools.
And we haven't really talked about with you two since the session started funding for education operations, the operations side of education, and that's the elephant in the room. There's no question in my eyes that there's a big difference between the Senate's approach and the House's approach relative to education. And I just want to point out to our viewers, we talked about that at the start of the show. Senator Hicks outlined significantly what Senate File 117 does. Representative Sommers talked about HB 140, and there's a difference. Senator Bebout.
Well, what you'll hear if you've been listening to the debate in the Senate, it continually comes up about the huge deficit we do have, and I think we made a lot of progress working together for Wyoming over the last year or two, where we've cut that by 20%. And now I think we need to further reduce that. We tried to do revenue enhancement, it failed. So the Senate continues to talk about this huge deficit we have and how do we chip away at it. And part of that is maybe not so much capital construction. Part of it is responsible reductions, possibly in education. So,
Mr. President, if I could, though, you've heard from educators and you've heard from superintendents. And in the press, there are words like scary being applied to the Senate's approach to education cuts, and they're serious cuts. Some revenue, but mostly cuts to the tune of $60 million or so over the biennium, coupled with the cuts of a year ago. Are you concerned, maybe, Representative Sommers alluded to this earlier, that these cuts are maybe a little too far and you're going to be back here then doing what you did with the Department of Health, restoring monies to education? Are you concerned that the Senate's version is too severe as we speak today?
There's always concerns about when you make reductions, but the flip side of that is we've been so generous with the way we funded everything in Wyoming because of the wealth we've had from the minerals industry. And my goodness, we just spent so much money, and thank goodness we put a lot of it away in savings. And when the Speaker and I were co-chairs of the JAC, we realized that. We said we got to build our funds, we got to build LISRA. So we positioned ourselves to deal with this, but you always have that concern about it. But we think in the Senate that it's a responsible and a reasonable way to start the discussion. And when you look at the amount of money we spend relative to other places in the region,
And, you know, it's not just like a few $1,000s more. It's, you know, in the region we spend twice as much as a lot of states, half as much as all the rest of them. And maybe that's right, but we just need to have that discussion. So we're trying to be reasonable and responsible as best we can, but you never know until you get into it and start talking about it. So we've taken a strong position, and I feel good about our position. The amount of money in 117 is about $42 million, I believe, and we phase it in. That's what you should do. What I've heard from state superintendents is, you know, we understand we got to make some reductions. We want to work with you. Don't do it all at once. We got to protect the small schools. We need to hold them harmless. So it's a plan. It's a good start. And I haven't seen House Bill 140, but I've heard that there's some initiatives in there that try to make responsible reductions as well. So we're looking forward to working together on those two issues.
Your philosophy, Mr. Speaker, with education, a little different than the Senate. Also kind of looks at the revenue side a little more clearly in my perspective.
Well, and I think the work, you know, began a year ago with House Bill 236, a 5-part plan, if you folks remember, so House Bill 140 advances that down the road with no tax increases, no fee increases. But really a couple different deals, some more reductions, right? We've cut $77 million a year now, and some of that's going to roll out next year. Hasn't even been felt. So that's about a 5-6% reduction. Our proposed reductions would bring it up 8-9% above the Department of Health now. But I think the House is in a position where we can talk more reductions that are far away from the classroom, and efficiencies and transportation we've got in the bill to save about $6 million a year, special education, some savings, workers' comp. So we're trying to get several areas where we think we can reduce back and get more efficient. But I think the other part is we got to have this conversation. We're being held hostage by what was done in the 1990s and 1980s, frankly. And so we're talking about modernizing our revenue. And then I think the key thing that I always hear about, you have these billions of dollars in trust funds. And we've worked hard to save them. And I was a person that said, hey, we don't need this revenue off our trust funds yet. Let's just keep building them. And we've doubled them and doubled them again. And now I think it's time to recognize what Governor Hathaway said. I just read his State of the State speech in 1975, and when he was proposing this. And it's really about this long-term revenue now off this. This is a very stable, large source of income that would really preempt any tax increases. So the scope of the problem is this. It's $330 million a year shortfall. About 90 of that is major maintenance. So we're sitting there looking at, you know, a $240 million shortfall. Not going to tax all that, not going to cut all that. And so we're continuing to kind of work around the edges and try to use our existing revenue streams, and then we can balance that and really save our cash. The governor's proposal, which he had to do under current law, the appropriations proposal, spends a lot of our rainy day cash, and our House proposal now really tries to slow that burn rate down.
You're confident then there's common ground with education. You believe that the conference committees can do a good job in getting bills that are acceptable, a bill acceptable to both of you?
Well, absolutely. And you know, the Senate is going to be strong defending the Senate's position. The House will be strong defending the House position. That's the way it is. But we also understand that at the end of the day, it's about Wyoming, and we will work together to try to find solutions that are better for everybody in the end. And that's what happens. There'll be some tense moments. I mean, that's a given.
Let's move on to a couple other topics.
Well, and I think the thing, if I could.
Excuse me, you bet, Mr.
I think the big deal is, you know, that's why we're elected, to come down here and solve problems, not to kick it on to the 65th legislature. And we might not solve it all, but I think we can solve some more pieces of this in the next couple of weeks. And it's an ongoing thing. Folks have been talking about education in this state since the first day of statehood. And it's one of our fundamental rights in our Constitution, with speech and religion and every other right we have. And so I think we're going to keep working on it.
On to a couple other topics. We have a couple minutes left in our discussion today. Endow bills are moving forward. You're both strong supporters of the governor's economic diversification initiatives. Mr. President, what's happened in the Senate, and how are those heading to the House?
Absolutely. It's been a top priority of mine as well. And you know, we started down that road a year ago, and we need to continue. The Senate has worked very diligently, and Management Council, which was both the House and the Senate, had these bills put forward. The Senate is sending 4 decent bills to the House that move the Endow initiative down the road, and we worked hard. We've got some good products there, and then it's on to the House and see what they do with it. And we really need to continue to do all those 5 components of the Endow, and I'm totally supportive of them.
Mr. Speaker, the House going to be supportive as well?
I think so. Well, and we've passed all the blockchain bills, and we've moved all those, created a tremendous excitement, really worldwide, nationwide. Wyoming's really being mentioned all around the world in this area is really going to be the first. And we have many firsts in this state, and this will be another one. So that part's exciting, and we're looking forward to, we've worked on those bills. A lot of House members have helped with those bills, and we're supportive. And I think the process through the introductory votes in the Senate was really the key. I think we'll get to the finish line on those bills. We might add a little bit to them. That always happens. But I think they're going to come out in really good shape.
Mr. President, there's a lot of discussion about capital construction still in the legislature. A $40 million office building in Casper went down in the Senate twice. There's some discussion on whether it's time to continue to move forward or to put the brakes on, as we talked a little bit about last week.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, you know, the Senate is wanting to slow things down and try to be in a position to whittle away at this deficit that we have. We've kind of prioritized in the Senate the capital construction for the state. The number 1 priority has been the Capitol. That's funded. Number 2 priority is the state hospital, the WLRC. The third one for me was the Casper office building, right there with the community college. And then at the bottom of the list is the science initiative. But all of them are in there. They're all moving forward on the bill that the Senate passed, other than the Casper office building, which I think it's time to do that one. I'm supporting it.
We've got about 15 seconds left, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, I think the key for people to know that we've been saving and working on these projects, many of them for 10 years. The money's in the bank, it's all paid for, and the delay is just basically increase the costs another 4 or 5%. We're going to have to find more money. So hopefully we move forward.
Now the fun begins, I think, here at the legislature in the next week. It'll be interesting for the people of Wyoming to watch. Speaker of the House, Steve Harshman, and the President of the Senate, Eli Bebout, thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing how things turn out next week.
Well, thanks for having us.
You're sure welcome. And that's a wrap for us on this week of Capital Outlook. Again, we invite you to join us next Friday. We'll visit with the leadership. We'll also have another conversation with Governor Matt Mead. Thanks for joining us, and have a good evening.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.